We always hear about murder and crime in California, Colorado, Florida, among other states. There are awesome channels all over YouTube that are dedicated to true crime. But I thought it would be fun to create a channel to focus on true crime in the Midwest since it's not usually focused on. I myself live and grew up in Iowa. We have plenty of crime too. I find true crime fascinating, but I've also created this channel to inform you of the victims impacted by these crimes as well. I have so many ideas for this channel and I'm excited to go on this journey together. All my sources for this video are listed below in the description box. One of them being the podcast Murder and Such. It's a fantastic podcast with an interview in part 2 with Angela Johnson's best friend. It's also where I got a great chunk of my info too. If you like what you hear and you love true crime, subscribe and drop me a comment. I may pronounce names wrong and I apologize for that. Our very first video from Midwest Mystery and Mayhem is about the infamous Dustin Honken and Angela Johnson. They murdered 5 people in 1993 to cover up for Dustin's meth business. Unfortunately, I couldn't find too much information on Dustin and Angela's childhoods, nor could I find much information on the victims, but I do have quite a story for you. Dustin Lee Honken was born on March 22, 1968 in Arizona. After high school, he attended a community college in Tempe, Arizona. His favorite class and the subject matter he excelled in was chemistry. Eventually, he started to manufacture methamphetamines with his brother Jeff. The state of Iowa was lucrative for selling meth, and Dustin had a high-quality product. He was driving from Arizona to Iowa to sell pounds of the drug to 2 men, Terry DeGeus and Greg Nicholson. Dustin got tired of taking the risk of driving to Iowa constantly and decided to make the state his mainstay. He moved to Britt with a population of just a little under 2,000 people and about 40 minutes away from Mason City, Iowa. Dustin kept his circle tight. He had a man by the name of Timothy Kotkamp that helped him make the meth. Greg and Terry were the sellers. Dustin met and fell for Terry's ex-girlfriend Angela Johnson. Angela was born in 1964 in Forest City, Iowa. They started dating soon after meeting each other. In 1993, the police had a search warrant for Greg for drug trafficking. To escape the charges, the police got Greg to flip. They needed him to set up Dustin for proof of his crimes. This meant Greg had to wear a wire while he was with Dustin. Because of the evidence brought forth by Greg's recorded encounter, Dustin and Timothy were arrested for conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamine. Not only that, but they were being charged with a federal charge of running a drug enterprise in both Arizona and Iowa. This all took place in March of 1993. Both Dustin and Timothy were facing at least 10 years in prison. Since the prosecutor needed Greg's testimony against Dustin, Dustin learned of Greg's betrayal and he was red-hot furious. While Dustin sat in jail, Greg fell in love with a woman named Lori Duncan and her 2 beautiful daughters. Candace was 10 years old and Amber was 6 years old. He eventually moved in with Lori in Mason City, Iowa. Dustin and Timothy were both bonded out by Angela. Wanting revenge, Dustin sent Angela to purchase a gun. It's believed that around this time, Dustin was using high amounts of his own product. As someone with experience as a meth addict, it can cause major obsessive thinking, and Dustin was obsessed with getting revenge on Greg, so he could have been a major red flag. On July 24, 1993, Dustin and Angela found out that Greg was living with Lori Duncan and her daughters. Using Angela as a decoy, Dustin bombarded in the house after her. This is where it gets triggering and gruesome, just to forewarn you. Also, keep in mind that Timothy was not aware of Dustin's plans or homicide crimes. First, Dustin had Greg in one room while Angela and the females were in a different room. Dustin forced Greg to speak to a camcorder to claim everything about Dustin's involvement in the case was a lie. In the meantime, Angela had tied Lori and her daughters to chairs. She gagged them to prevent them from screaming for help. I can't even imagine the terror going through their minds. After the recording, Dustin tied Greg up and dragged him into the other room to join the girls. Filled with rage, Dustin started to strangle Greg in front of everyone, including the young girls. Angela hit Lori over and over in the head with the gun until she was knocked unconscious. Once Dustin believed Greg was dead, he strangled Lori as well. Next is one of the saddest things I have ever heard, and an even more needless crime than the first two. The two young girls sobbed uncontrollably, which further enraged Dustin. So he strangled both these poor, confused little girls, too. They hauled the 4 bodies to the trunk of their car and drove outside of the city to find a place to bury their bodies. Before he started digging, Dustin shot each one of them several times to make sure they were dead. He didn't want to leave anyone alive. He wanted 0 witnesses. The very next day, Greg, Lori, Candace, and Amber were reported missing. Dustin continued to cook meth with Timothy, and it's believed he was using during this period too. He was overly paranoid and believed Terry had flipped on him as well. From what I understand, Terry was supposed to testify against him too, so Dustin's paranoia was buried in some truth. Angela came to Terry upset. She stated that she was terrified of Dustin, she wanted Terry back, and needed his help to get away. Terry still had feelings for Angela, and he had a big heart, so he agreed to help her. On November 5th, 1993, Angela lured Timothy southwest of Mason City by claiming she needed his help. Instead, Terry was ambushed by Dustin. Dustin beat Terry with a bat and threw questions at him about his dealings with the police. He could have just left Terry in the middle of nowhere after the beating, but instead he shot him twice in the head. He proceeded to bury him and dropped his car off at an apartment complex. Terry was reported missing the very next day. Angela confided in her best friend about their crimes. When she told her best friend, she threatened her to keep quiet. She let Christy know that if she opened her mouth, Dustin would come for her and her children. Christy promised not to tell, but didn't want anything more to do with Angela. One day, Christy went through her daughter's closet. She found a makeup bag that she recognized as Angela's bag. Inside this makeup bag was the gun used to kill all 5 victims. Upset, Christy called Angela, and Angela sent Dustin over to retrieve the gun. Again, if you're interested in hearing an interview with her best friend, Christy, you should check out my links below to the Murder and Such podcast. After he took the gun from Christy's home, Dustin decided to chop it up and recruited his trustful friend Timothy for help. Timothy had an idea of what happened to Greg and Terry, so saying no wasn't plausible. After they chopped up the gun, they drove outside of town. Throughout the Iowa countryside, they threw the pieces of the gun out. In 1995, the drug cases against Dustin and Timothy were dropped. The prosecutor's 2 key witnesses, Greg and Terry, were missing. Not long after the case was dropped, Dustin moved from Britt, Iowa to Mason City. Even with 2 children in the home, one was from a previous relationship Angela had, and the other was a child the 2 of them had procreated. He decided to cook meth inside of their home. Dustin also had a job at a factory. He approached a coworker one day about helping him manufacture meth. He needed someone to run another meth lab for him. He promised his coworker large sums of money if he helped him out. At first, this coworker denied him. He went directly to the police, who, in turn, asked him to be an informant. They really wanted Dustin behind bars. He agreed and went back to Dustin to accept the offer. Thanks to the information gathered by this coworker, the police were able to get a search warrant in 1996. Inside Dustin's home, they found a meth lab among other items relating to drugs. So, he and Timothy were charged with conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamines. Strangely, after all these run-ins with Dustin, he wasn't left in jail. He was released with an ankle monitor to track his movements. This just blew my mind. Just an ankle monitor, really? After everything? Dustin must have felt invincible because, despite wearing an ankle monitor, he convinced Timothy to go with him to Bondurant, Iowa, to try to break into a storage unit. He strongly believed the evidence against the two was inside this unit. When that plan failed, he tried to get Timothy on board with him so they could make the witnesses in the case disappear. Timothy was terrified and went to the police after this conversation. He wanted nothing to do with murdering people. Again, Dustin felt invincible. He tried to hire another inmate to murder Timothy when he was released. Again, Dustin was reported to the police. So he tried to break out. Seriously. Yet again, he was snitched on. I can't help but laugh at all this. For a man that was so paranoid, he trusted anyone and everyone. In 1996, Angela was thrown in jail for conspiracy to manufacture methamphetamines as well. In 1998, Dustin was sentenced to 27 years for conspiracy to manufacture meth. Now, the police pretty much knew that Dustin was responsible for the 5 disappearances, but they didn't have enough proof and they had 0 bodies. They couldn't charge him of murder just yet. In 2000, Angela, over a long period of time, opened up to a police informant about the 5 murders. She even drew a map of where the bodies were located. She believed this informant was a mobster who could get rid of the bodies permanently for her. Since Angela was in jail and the information Angela confided to the inmate was released, Christy felt courageous enough to come forward to the police with her information on the murders. On October 13, 2000, the police found the bodies of Greg, Lori, Candace, and Amber on County Road just west of Mason City. The coroner found that all 4 of the victims died from the gunshots to their heads, which means they were still alive when they threw them in the trunk. So sad. I couldn't find much information about Greg, Lori, and her daughters. I wish I could have because it's important to know about the victims, much more so than about the murderers. I wasn't able to even find their obits either, which was disappointing. On November 8th, the police finally found the body of Terry in a farm field that was 1 mile west of Birchinall, Iowa. Just like the other 4 victims, Terry was killed by the gunshot to his head. Thankfully, I was able to find out some information on Terry's background. Terry was born in Charles City, Iowa. In school, Terry had been a record holder for pole vaulting, and he was also on the wrestling team. He graduated from West Hancock High in 1980. Terry loved motorcycles, and he loved to play pool in his spare time. Most importantly of all, he loved his daughter and had a great relationship with her. When he disappeared, his daughter's heart was broken. He had a strong relationship with his ex-wife, the mother of his daughter. In the Global Gazette, his wife was quoted as saying, "I get angry. Everyone has this bad picture of me. I wish more people knew that if you had a piece of Terry's heart, you have the world." Once the bodies were found, Dustin Honken and Angela Johnson found themselves with federal murder charges. For some reason, in 2002, the judge deemed the inmate witness's testimony as inadmissible. Dustin and Angela both pled not guilty. Despite not having the witnesses' testimonies, they had Christy, who was ready to testify against the both of them. In October of 2004, Dustin was found guilty and received the death penalty for the 5 murders. In May of 2005, Angela was convicted of 4 counts of murder and also received the death penalty. However, in March of 2012, the death penalty for Angela was thrown out and she received life in prison instead. July of 2019, it was all over the news that U.S. Attorney General William Barr ordered that the U.S. Bureau of Prisons resumed the execution of 5 death row inmates, which included Dustin Honken. So he was scheduled for the death penalty for January 2020. Yes, this month and year. But in November 2019, the Supreme Court blocked the Trump administration from restarting the federal execution protocol. U.S. District Judge Tanya Chutkan stopped it after the 5 inmates challenged the decision. Keep in mind, this decision can be appealed in the future. The murders committed by Dustin Honken and Angela Johnson were horrific. This hit home hard since I'm from Iowa and I was involved with meth for many years. Don't worry, I've been sober for 4.5 years, but this could have happened to me, this could have happened to one of my friends. The fact that a man could kill 5 people over a drug business, including 2 young girls. Not only did he hurt those 5 people, but he also broke the hearts of their families and friends. Well, this concludes my first video from Midwest Mystery and Mayhem. Drop me a comment below. If you know more about this situation or even about the victims, drop me a comment. If I got any facts wrong, feel free to drop me a comment so I can pin it. If you have any suggestions, also drop me a comment. I appreciate you all, my lovely people. Until next time.